Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's meetup. We're so excited to have the honor of presenting Preston Singletary and his new exhibition opening tomorrow at Sandra Ainsley Gallery in Toronto. Preston started actually working with glass in 1982 and didn't realize when he first started that he was going to be connecting with the glass in the way that he is. But he began to experiment and found that he could use designs from his Tlingit heritage, and his work really began to take on a very important purpose and direction, which we're thrilled to share with you today. I'll go ahead and introduce Sandra Ainsley, Daniel Ainsley, and Preston all in the gallery there today to take us for a virtual tour of his latest exhibition, The Importance of Being Raven.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for being here today. I'm so excited that Preston is here, so I'm happy that you feel the same way and you want to hear what he has to say. And truthfully, Preston has a really important message in this show. I was telling him when he arrived today, I've read it a few times, but it became rather emotional to me, the message that he expresses through his work. And I'll leave it to Preston to tell you more about the importance of being Raven.
Very good. Well, thank you very much for hosting me. And this is our third show together.
Yes.
So from the initial conversation we had back in the mid 80s, I think, when we first met,
Yeah.
all of a sudden, here we are.
Exactly.
40 years later.
And that's right. We reminisced about that last night. The first time I met Preston was almost 40 years ago. We were both pretty young then, 40 years ago. But the interesting thing is on our first exhibition, a lot of you will remember just the time and the place. We had an exhibition, but no one got to see it in person because it was during COVID. So that was the first show. And it was beautiful, but it was only myself and Daniel, who you won't be able to see because he's on the camera right now.
Yeah. But so thank you for tuning in today and taking an interest in this show. It feels like we're back in that COVID era, but at least we're able to share this with you. I'm really happy for that. I have been working for many years really focusing since the late 90s on, or mid to late 90s, about the Tlingit style art, which I'm connected to through my mother's side of the family. So she, I interact with the tribal community quite a bit these days. I'm part of a cultural arts organization that is helping develop education around the traditional arts in all its forms, from like totem pole carving, wood carving, masks, weaving, basketry, everything you can think of. So we are. So I'm honored to be a part of that. So to kind of rewind a little bit, I met this man in 2004 named Walter Porter, who shared with me his work in mythology, like a Joseph Campbell type of perspective, that he applied to the Tlingit stories. And Raven in the Box of Daylight was one in particular that was very significant. It's a very well-known story. It's hundreds, if not thousands of years old. And so when Walter, grew up, he was more of a speaker. He didn't write. He was from the oral tradition. He spoke about the Raven stories in such a way that it was really he unlocked a lot of the metaphors within the story, and I got a deeper understanding of that particular story, which I've been able to apply in many different ways. So after Raven, gave the human beings the water, and he took the sun and he placed it in the sky and gave us the daylight. These are all ancient stories. So I started to ask myself, like, when is the next story going to be allowed into the annals of Tlingit history or culture or whatever? So I started to try to imagine what Raven was up to now. And so I partnered with a man named Garth Stein, who's internationally acclaimed novelist, writer. He wrote a book on loosely tying together Tlingit mysticism and in a novel form, more of a contemporary story. And so I asked him to help me write these stories, and I gave him the checklist of certain, what I'm imagining Raven is up to now. And so in our version of the story, Raven has been asleep for, I'm going to wander around the gallery now, and we're going to talk. I'll try to go kind of chronologically about what the story unfolds. So in our version of the story, Raven has fallen asleep, and say he'd fallen asleep for 100 years. And so he basically, he wakes up and he doesn't recognize the world around him. Instead of the tall trees, he sees these tall buildings, and he's rubbing the sleep out of his eyes, and he's trying to see what's going on, and he sees the trees, and then he blinks again and he sees tall buildings. And so Raven becomes concerned. He flew off, and he's trying to figure out what's going on in the world today. So, and the original story, go back with me. So Raven is a white bird, and the white animal, albino animals that occur in nature are always thought of as having a supernatural power. And Raven, so he's been asleep for a long time, and his feathers have molted. So he wakes up, and he's a white bird again. And so he's surveying the world. He's taking it in, and he is trying to figure out what's going on. In another version of the story that I didn't illustrate in this particular collection, so how Raven is transformed into a blackbird. Originally, when he stole the sun, and the old man who was in possession of the sun realized he's been fooled, and so he grabs Raven by the tail, and he holds him over the central fire pit. They throw pitch onto the fire, and this black smoke turns Raven into a blackbird, from a white bird into a blackbird. So in this version of the story, he kind of rolls himself in wood ash, where the people build fires on the beach. And so that's how he changes himself back into a blackbird again. So he can sort of, navigate the world without people pointing and gawking and laughing at him. So you really have to sort of, Sandra's going to share the story, the catalog that was made, and in the catalog are all the words that Garth, or the story that Garth wrote. And there's no way that I don't have enough time to read it verbatim, but I hope that you all can look back at that, at that catalog, and then you can get the story, because it's pretty clever. There's a lot of, I don't know, euphemisms and sort of contemporary culture that we weave into these particular stories. So that's something that I hope you all check out. So now Raven is reemerged, and he's traveled. So the first people that he goes to sort of connect with are the landowner people. So this is represents a land otter, and the land otters in Tlingit culture are actually shapeshifters. They live in the woods, and along the rivers, and they when they see people who have drowned or lost in the woods, are suffering from exposure, they'll take the souls of those people and transform them into land otters. So there's quite a funny sort of encounter where Raven is talking to the Kushtaka, the land otter people, and he says, I met some people, and the white man says that there's heat waves in the ocean. They're destroying the snow crabs. So he was trying to talk about all these dangers that exist in the world. And so he tells the Kushtaka that because they have connections with all the other spirit animals in the world, and so he realizes that the word will travel faster by having this ally and helping him spread the message. And then so in our this version of the story, he goes and revisits a petrel who is he is at the he lives at this natural spring, this source of natural spring water, and to Raven it's the most delicious, purest water that he's ever had. And so in an ancient story, he visited Petrel and he stole all the water from Petrel. Well, so he's back again now. He's come to visit Petrel and he goes, hey Raven, I don't trust you. You have to go away from here. And he um, starts to tell Petrel about all of these things that he's noticing in the world. And so he basically kind of whiles away the hours, and when darkness hits, he goes, hey, I'm just gonna stay the night and I'll take off in the morning. And they have these long conversations. And so in the old days, or in the old story, Raven actually, when Petrel fell asleep, he took dog feces and smeared it on Petrel's butt. And when the daylight broke, then he says, "Hey, old man, you soiled yourself in the middle of the night." And so Petrel, he's embarrassed. He flies off and cleans himself up, and then Raven swallows up that entire natural spring. And he's so engorged with water, he's trying to fly off, and the water is dribbling out of his mouth, and it creates the rivers and the streams. So in this version, Raven is kind of lamenting about, how the water is filled with microplastics and heavy metals and all these things. And, he spies this fog hat, this magical hat that Petrel used to torment Raven with. So, it had sort of this mystical power of being able to entrap an individual in a fog. So for days and days, it followed followed Raven around. And so Raven says, when he pulls this trick on Raven again, he does the whole routine of smearing, dog poop on his butt. And then he sees that hat and he makes off with the hat. So he takes off and he's traveling on to a place where he comes to this meadow, and then asks aloud, what is this place? What is this building that I'm seeing? And there's a flicker that answers, and the flicker says, well, that's an institute. That's where they used to put, Native American kids, and they would kill the Indian, save the man, and say, now it's fallen into disuse, and it's there, but all the souls of the people that died there, all of the children, and that's how the residential school graves were discovered. So Raven, can feel this, this connection to the, these souls that are trying to, communicate to him. So he takes that fog hat and he puts it in the meadow and imbues it with this haze of sorrow. So like when people who walk by, they don't understand, what's happening, but then they start to investigate, and that's how they discovered the residential school graves. So that's one component of this story. We've got over here, there's, or how about the killer whale here? So now killer whales in the old days was, they were, stories of how killer whales could climb onto the land. They would come up onto the beach and they would build bonfires, and they would do this when people weren't watching. And if people would come to that place where they were gathering, they would scurry off into the water, and they would return to their their village in the bottom of the ocean. And so he comes, killer whale comes up and he's like, Raven, I got to talk to you. This is something, that your people, you created the people. So we have a problem here because, your people are destroying our habitat. Your people are created this, the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and it's desecration of our environment. And so, so Raven then decides, so he's trying to broker a truce with Raven to call off the human beings so they'll correct their way of living. And and then over here, Raven then as he climbs down, he comes to this kelp forest and he cuts this kelp bulb in half and he discovers this ladder and he climbs down the ladder and then he visits the killer whale village. So there's like a longhouse and he sees killer whales that are sort of swimming around like people on a little promenade, in a city or something. And so he goes and visits the killer whale and says, I think you misunderstand, the powers I may or may not have. I mean, yes, I created people, but I gave them free will. They're their own actors. They're not, I have nothing to do with them. I have very little to do with them, except for sometimes they feed me, and I'm always hungry. So then they have this long discussion about like, well, if you're not helping, you're hurting. So he puts these concepts into Raven's head, and Raven now is carrying this knowledge with him. Is like, if you're not helping, you're hurting. So he starts to apply that to the world around him, and to understand, kind of what's going on in the world currently. So
That's kind of the turning point for him, isn't it?
yeah. So he's learning all these things from all these interactions with people. We've got there's lots of elements within the story where he's seeking spiritual guidance, and he goes into the sweat lodge. He builds a sweat lodge for himself, and he's looking for the answer and looking from the Great Spirit. He's trying to gain the knowledge so he can try to help the people and bring the world back into order. So there's elements in here that have like that are shaman amulets and rattles and things that are implements that kind of relate to the spirituality of the Tlingit. So in the old days, I did a lot of things that were based on other kinds of objects that were traditional, like rattles and bowls and dishes and hat forms and horse baskets and things like that. And so now I'm finding this new kind of way of creating a narrative, with these pieces. So after he goes to, the shaman, and this shaman gives him these rattles and puts him into a trance, and he's kind of recovering after this spiritual journey, and he's sitting, and then he encounters a loon. The loon comes up to him and he says, well, you just hung out with that shaman, you know who he is, right? And like, well, he couldn't see before, when I met him, he was blind. And I offered him a ride on my back, and I, was diving, and, I saw a little fish. I went after the fish, and each time I dove, the shaman started to laugh and chuckle, and he says, I can see. So he gave sight back to the shaman, and the shaman had nothing to give the loon except for his necklace. So he tosses this necklace around the loon, and that's how the loon got his necklace. And that's based on an older story too. So we're bringing these ancient narratives into the contemporary stories, and then we've got like so we can continue.
Oh, okay.
Got the Thunderbird egg, which the end of the story is just so Raven walked into a bar and he had a Thunderbird egg under his arm, dot 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 dot. To be continued. So the next chapter is going to contain some stories with a Thunderbird. I wanted to point this piece out. This is a piece, both of these pieces actually I did as a collaboration with a very significant friend and mentor to me, Joe David. And he is from the west coast of Vancouver Island. So he's Nuu-chah-nulth, and he has taught me a lot about the stories and the art and the details of all of the how I design and how I create these drawings and etch them into the glass. So he's present here. a couple of collaborations that we've done. And yeah,
What about the owl?
which
What about the owl? Was just
this is the eagle.
so the eagle.
Eagle.
The owl.
So yeah, so the eagle is so the Tlingit tribe is split into two halves. It's eagle and raven. So you're born into your mother's side. So raven unfortunately doesn't have a lot of presence in the old stories. There's only a few stories that eagle actually appears. And so in this version of the story, after the residential school grave sites are discovered, eagle, strong and powerful and regal, he decides like, well, I'll stay here and I'll guard over the souls of these lost children. And I'll be here and I'll keep my family here so that they'll always remember. And so that's the element of eagle in this particular story, kind of a helper to the raven at this point.
Well, especially in Canada, there's been a lot of unmarked graves, especially in churchyards right across the country.
Yeah. So that's so in this way, I'm trying to weave contemporary stories into and I think that's what would happen. And another one that's like ravens trying to protect missing and murdered Indigenous women.
Yes.
So, this is just something that I'm experimenting with and trying to bring, more awareness about the Native community and history and what is happening. Sometimes it can be kind of fun, and sometimes it can be kind of,
I think it's brilliant. It's pretty brilliant to actually take those stories and bring them into present day.
Yeah.
And where it stands for the Native people.
Mm-hmm.
And for the earth, for the planet. When we talk about the oceans.
Yeah, I mean, there's this interconnectivity that, we don't, we tend to like to draw borders and, like, oh, you're from here and you're from there. And it's just like, your people never did this. Your people never worked with glass. Well, now I have been working with glass for 40 years. So, the longer I do it, the more I feel it becomes a tradition. It becomes like a new tradition. And I always say, glass brings another dimension to Indigenous artwork. And it's something that I found, as an opportunity. So I think of my medium and the work that I do as kind of a transformational medium for the culture, for the art, for the and conceptually. So I'm trying to advance that now that I've done all this work with mythology and thinking about symbolism and understanding how to represent that in an art form or an art piece.
I also like the story behind the fisherman over there in the boat.
Yeah. So this is
timely.
So this is I skipped over parts of the story. And like I say, I think it's really good if you want to get the full weight of the story and the feeling behind it. Read the catalog, because I know people don't like to read very much these days, but maybe so many people in the group will. And so anyway, when Raven comes from the bottom of the ocean and he comes up through and that he's talking to the people and Raven he's constantly hungry. So he's always commanding people to feed me. And the folks here, they said, well, we don't have anything to give you. We've been fishing all day. Our salmon are depleted. The salmon runs are disappearing, and they're all concerned about it. So he, and that's when he learns that, the salmon are now genetically modified and they're manufactured. So in some new pieces that I'm working on, I have this sort of twisted DNA kind of strands of canes that are going to be rolled up in the glass piece, and then when I sandblast through it, you'll see like the DNA, and it will, the idea is that it's changed, it's genetically modified. So he learns that from the fishermen here that are paddling the canoe, and then on all of his adventures upward and onward. And I think this is the last piece I'll point out. This was kind of um, I think it's kind of cool. This idea to make a, Raven, his interconnectedness with humankind throughout the world, throughout the globe. So here's Raven sort of, he's traveling around the globe, and he is, so that just signifies the new adventures of Raven.
That's one of my favorite pieces.
Yeah.
It's not fair to have a favorite.
Yeah.
It really is a beautiful show.
Thank you.
And I have to stress as well about the catalog, because it's very touching. I mean, it makes the story so real, because it's something that we're all living. It's part of our lives. But to be able to make that connection for us is pretty cool. It really is.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for creating such a gorgeous exhibition for us. It really is beautiful and meaningful.
Thank you.
And I hope that everyone will. We're stressing the catalog again, but it really is pretty touching. Look at the catalog, and if anyone wants a price list from us, we're happy to send that as well.
We get a lot of questions like, well, where is it traveling to after this? I said, well, this is a gallery endeavor here. So all of these pieces, feel free to take one home.
Yeah.
Call up the gallery and pick out your favorite. No, but this, so what I'm really trying to do is create, a new sort of variety of Raven stories that I can choose to highlight. The longer the saga becomes, the more I'm actually able to create, new objects, new concepts. And so that's the nature of it. It might eventually culminate in some kind of a museum show, but I'll probably make more, different versions of it. So instead of reflecting always on the older stories, I'm now sort of inventing new stories and then trying to bring those to life. So that's kind of my new method, my new direction.
Well, it keeps everyone interested in you, wanting to know what the future is going to bring or what direction you take. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, I don't know if anyone wants to ask Preston some questions.
Thank you so much, Sandra and Preston. It's just really special the way that you're able to combine the history of the culture with contemporary narratives to really shed light on such important topics. And it's really clear the passion and the emotional connection that you really are able to shine through in the work. So thank you for sharing that for us. We do have a couple questions that I will get to here. Let's see. Howard wants to know, is the Tlingit community still primarily located in Alaska?
Yes. I mean, the original homeland, stretches from about Ketchikan, Alaska, up until Yakutat. And there's still, a large presence there. Also, a lot have migrated down to Washington State, ever since, like, my great grandmother migrated there in the 20s. So the second largest community would actually probably be Washington State, being that close to Alaska. But yeah, there's still a very pretty large tribal enrollment, about 40,000 or more, that are Tlingit and descendants.
All right, thank you. And I wanted to also mention to everyone that I did drop the link to the catalog in the chat. So if you'd like to access that, you can see it there. We do also have a question about the piece with the mobile. Can you please talk about that for us?
Yeah. Well, this kind of, harkens back to my, when I didn't go to school for art. I kind of fell into glass blowing at age 19. And I had this really big fascination with modernist art, modernism, the 30s and 40s. And it started with surrealism and modernism. And of course, Calder, this is obviously inspired by Calder. And I just made these for my own personal amusement, to be honest. These are things I love making them. Not everybody, relates to them. But I love the fact that, there's the kinetic sculpture. And this particular piece, what this really represents is the sweat lodge. So this is in the story, in that particular little chapter or vignette, it talks about the sweat lodge and the stones that are brought into the sweat lodge. And this is where Raven is trying to find his direction. He's looking for some sort of sign. And so when he builds this sweat lodge, it's usually, the sweat lodge process is usually about connecting with nature spirits and also ancestral spirits, and looking for guidance, looking for ways to improve yourself as a human being. It just constitutes personal growth, essentially. And so that's what this particular piece represents for me. That whole modernism thing, I used to really go deep into that, talking about, how Native American art was always excluded from the modern art world. And so for a long time, I looked at modernist artwork in these spare organic forms. And sometimes I would take inspiration from a Brancusi or a Henry Moore kind of wiggly shape, or Noguchi or whatever, but then I would adorn it with Northwest Coast art. And in my ways, it was sort of like, I was taking inspiration from them as they were taking inspiration from Native American art, African art, oceanic art, which led to a genre called primitivism. And when I learned about primitivism, I started to really question the whole thing of, art in general, appropriation, and where these influences come from. And so I felt like, well, if they were going to be inspired by, Native American artwork, I would be inspired by them, and let that come into the artwork that I was making.
Thank you. We do have another question from Judy Cushman.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about how this work will be shared with your tribe? Is that part of your vision to support your heritage?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm working with the tribe. As I mentioned, is Sea Alaska Heritage Incorporated, or Institute, I mean, Sea Alaska Heritage Institute, and they are the ones that are organizing education around all the cultural arts in all of its forms, from storytelling to art, in all of its forms, everything you could imagine, from skin sewing to silver, carving, making jewelry and all of this stuff. So yeah, I'm hoping that, if I can amass enough of these stories, Garth and I have an idea to make a picture book that would essentially tell a story illustrated by my pieces that, we could make as a, kind of a saga, a Raven saga. But yeah, I'm always working with the tribal community these days, and learning and meeting new people. Maybe at some point, get established up in Alaska, maybe have a, permanent exhibit, or maybe a glass studio, who knows?
Preston, I'm going to interrupt for a second, because maybe you want to just touch on for a moment some of the special projects you're working on right now that people might not be aware of.
Yeah. So I'm currently working on some set design for the Pacific Northwest Ballet. There is the Sleeping Beauty that's going to be debuting on January 31st in Seattle. It's got like a 9 or 10 day run. And so that was my first first ever foray into set design. So that's kind of a fun project. It's very different and unexpected. I play music. I have a band. We try to interpret the culture through music. So we use indigenous languages. So I'm always working with that. It takes up a big part of my brain space. always working on ways to promote the band. And as well, let's see, what else? Anything else I mentioned?
I'm not sure. I think that was one project that's gone out among this room.
Well, I have an exhibition, the Raven in the Box of Daylight exhibition is currently up in Indianapolis. That is a major exhibition that has about 60 pieces, and it places you in the thread of the story of Raven in the Box of Daylight, how he brought daylight to the world. So after it finishes its run there, it's going to go to Spokane Museum Art and Culture, and then it's going to go to Davenport, Iowa, of all places.
If any of you can see it in any of these locations, I saw it at the Museum of Glass about 4 years ago, perhaps.
Yeah.
And it was just outstanding.
Yeah, it's it was definitely a major endeavor, which would be hard to duplicate today for me because of so many pieces, so many monumental pieces, and sort of that theatrical sort of way of experiencing the show, and that is traveling through 2026. So it's had a good long run.
It's well worth seeing. Really, very thrilling.
All right. Well, thank you. It looks like that is all our questions. So I want to thank you so much for being here. Remind everyone as well about the catalog link in the chat. And is that also on the website, Sandra, or?
It's up on our website as well.
Okay, and so you can also visit the website later. And I know we had a few people joining late, so I just want to remind everyone as well that we do have a video library at aacgglass.org exclusively for our members. So if you would like to watch this again or see any of our past programs, make sure to talk to Linda and she can get you signed up with a password, or just visit the homepage of the website and you can sign in there. All right. Well, thank you so much. This has been so special. The exhibition is outstanding. And as Sandra said, it's absolutely impossible to pick a favorite, though I think I have a few. So,
and thank you very, very much on behalf of Preston and myself and Daniel. We really appreciate you coming to visit us today.
Oh, thank you. It looks like at the last minute, we did have one more question pop in the chat.
Oh, sure.
From Roni. Roni, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? She didn't type it out.
There we go. I had to unmute.
Okay.
I bought this in Seattle, Washington, and I really cherish it. Is this from that tribe? This is symbol of, it's wood carving. I don't know if you can see it.
Oh, pull it back a little bit. It's blurred. It's a little blurry.
Yeah.
But it looks like it looks like some sort of amulet, some kind of carving.
It's the head of a bird. It's the head, and I always thought maybe it's a hawk, but maybe it's from that tribe because it's beautiful. I wear it like a lot. So let me see if you can see it. I'll back up a little more.
Oh yeah, it looks like a little raven with a wing, a little raven head with a wing, or an eagle. Oh, no, it's an eagle. I can see by the little hook in its beak.
The hook.
Yeah.
So that is what I thought, but I was thinking it might be a raven.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now, but if you'd like to stay on, Preston and Sandra, I'm sure people might want to still say hello or ask a few more questions.
Okay.
So, thank you again.